Welcome to a live recording from socialmedia.org's Brands Only Summit, the How to Run Social Media at a Big Brand conference. This is Nichole Kelly from Social Media Explorer with her presentation, What You're Missing in Social Media Measurement.
So, what's happening, party people? We got all these big brands in the room trying to figure out measurement. I'm super honored to be here. I was brand side for 15 years, and now I'm not allowed to come anymore because I own a consultancy. So, glad to be here and excited to talk to you a little bit about social media measurement. The big thing that's interesting to me is that I've actually been on the speaking circuit since 2009 talking about social measurement, doing a lot of case study analysis and figure out the big answer to the ROI question. And what's interesting is that the social media industry report for the last 4 years has placed how to measure social media ROI as the #1 thing that marketers want to understand. And what's interesting about those numbers is that it started the first year the report came out, it was at 90%. Last year it was at 87%. This year it was at 88%. That's probably just rounding, it's probably flat. And that's really interesting to me because inherently social media is measurable. It happens online. In the world of data, there's lots of ones and zeros passing. So why haven't we been able to actually figure this out for each of our organizations? And so I started to look at, okay, what really is holding marketers back from being able to answer these questions? And the biggest answer that I got was something pretty simple. It's that we've just really zoomed in way too far. We are looking at social media down to the level of the micro post, of how familiar or how well a post did. And the challenge with that is that there's a couple of things that stand out. Number one, we think this is a social media problem. But let's be honest, we don't really even know how to measure marketing. And we're trying to apply what's happening in marketing without understanding what's already broken in our data. I could get into a whole nother session on attribution modeling, media mix models. We could go a long way talking about that. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that we start talking about these social media metrics, right? All of these tools are providing us with social metrics, and so that's what we're using for our reporting. And I'm not sure exactly when it happened that we started, all these tools came out and they started using terms like retweets and followers and mentions. Thank you. Retweets, followers, mentions, comments, likes, all of these different metrics. And we started actually reporting using that language. We're talking in tongues. People don't understand this. Executives don't understand what value a retweet brings to the actual business. And we've got to stop doing that. We also think that software tools are going to solve the problem. So we're out there looking, and the #1 question I get is, what tool should I use to measure ROI? It's called CRM. Really simple answer. It's not going to happen in a social media management tool, not because they don't want to, because frankly they do. I have lots of friends that work at these companies. They want to figure this out, but they don't have access to the data you need to be able to tell you the answer to that question. Social media tools are not going to solve this problem for you. And then the last one is that we actually started also talking about big data. The answer to all of this is let's collect more and more data, right? Big data is going to be the answer. The more data that we can collect, the better. And what I'll tell you is that it really isn't about how big your data is. It's about how well you can use it. So the other challenge that I'm seeing too, and this is pretty common across companies of all sizes, is that what we're reporting on is a single channel. We're looking at social media and we're doing all of these social media reports. We're really looking at it from a one-channel view. But we're not stupid. We know our customers live in an omni-channel world. They are touching multiple channels, especially just looking at the digital channel space. They can touch up to 100 different things that you guys have posted, and we're only measuring one channel. And what we really need to get to is understanding how social media influences the entire customer journey. I heard a lot of talk today about setting goals and measuring towards those goals, and all of that is really important stuff. But if your goal is customer retention or demand generation, and that's the only thing that you're measuring, what you'll miss is that maybe social has a huge influence on another part of the business. Maybe product adoption, maybe retention, maybe demand generation. It's hard to say unless you actually measure all the way through that process. Because it's like we measure up until we acquire a customer, which is not my favorite word, and then we just forget about them. We don't actually measure how they perform as customers on the back end. And so we need to start actually looking at this from how do we store full campaign history, everything that someone touches. And frankly, there are a lot of organizations that do this, but their marketing teams don't know they do it, and it's certainly not the reports that are being requested. We're like, tell us how awesome social is. Can you give me a report that says social is really awesome? Instead of saying, hey, let's look at the slice of people that actually touch social and look how they've performed as customers. And that's really what we're ultimately going for. So you're probably like, wow, that's like some big, heavy stuff. I don't know if we can fix that stuff. That's a little outside of the span of my job. So what I can tell you is you can absolutely fix this. There are shortcuts to fixing it, and I'm going to give you a few shortcuts today that you have 100% control of, and you can actually start changing this in your organization. And what will happen is that we're going to solve this for social, and it's going to change how we measure all of marketing entirely through the digital channel, which is really exciting. The best analogy I can give you for what we're trying to go for comes from exercise. Does anybody in here exercise? Yeah, I pretend to do CrossFit 5 times a week. My abs are getting super strong. And when we exercise, we do crunches, right? Anybody done crunches? Or as I like to call them, crunchies. Why do we do that? Because someone told us along the way that if we isolate that muscle and we work it super hard, we will get six-pack abs. That's our goal. We want six-pack abs, so we're going to isolate the muscle. Well, we need to do the same thing with social media users, the people who are touching our social channels. We need to be pushing metadata into our databases that says, hey, this person touched social. It happened to be Twitter. It was on a blog post. And every single thing that they're touching along the way. Because the minute that this data is actually in your databases, guess what happens? You can slice, dice, segment, run any report you want, as long as it's getting to that core database that attaches it to revenue. That's what we're ultimately going after. And so how do we do that? The biggest tip I can give you is to do a data flow audit. This is really looking at how data flows through the organization, where it lives, or rather where it hides inside of the organization. And the number one tip that I can give you, the biggest shortcut to get 80% of the results with literally 20% of the effort, or sometimes even 1% of the effort to get 99% of the results, is to look at what your paid advertising team is doing. Look at how they're tracking. How are they getting data into this system? What processes are they using? What systems is that data going into? How are those systems actually integrated together? Because a lot of times what you'll find is that you can actually piggyback on what they're already doing with the existing tools that you have. The answer is not to create a new shiny way to measure social media. The answer is to figure out how you can leverage existing systems and push that social data into those systems. You will find gaps. You'll find some process gaps. You'll find some types of content that maybe aren't 100% measurable, but it'll get you closer. Because progress before perfection is better than standing still. The number one thing that you will find that paid marketing teams do is that they tag their links in social. Doesn't really matter what web analytics system you're using. Every paid advertising team worth a grain of salt tags their links. That's how they're doing a lot of their tracking. They've also integrated a lot of systems with that tracking, which is pretty awesome. And so when you find that out, regardless of what system they're using, you want to create a tagging structure that will work for social. And this is a Google Analytics example, which uses source, medium, campaign, content, and term. Doesn't matter what the system is, the name's just going to change. Essentially, you get 4 or 5 different fields that you can stuff data into. And literally, I try to stuff as much into those fields as I possibly can. And so the first one is source. Now, the way I use source is I put SLC plus the social channel where that content was distributed. The reason I use SLC is because what I'm doing is I'm creating a control group of social link clickers. And I'm really lazy, and if I go and ask for a report that anybody that has SLC in the source, it's super, super easy. And then I can also segment it by channel if I want. For medium, I put content type. And for campaign, I put content title. Another one that's just purely utility. Most of these web analytics systems don't tell you the page title that this was on. And so I put it in there to make my life easier so I don't have to click to figure that out. In all of this, these are like the 3 keys, because the questions you're going to get is, oh, look how Twitter influenced the customer journey. How did that, what kind of content was it? Now you can answer that question. Then you'll get which topics perform best. And now you'll be able to answer that question too. Some other ones that you might want to consider are things like product, department, line of business. Paid marketing probably already has this in their data infrastructure and their tagging structure. So you want to leverage on that, and you actually want to track that as well. Social account name. If you're actually using multiple social accounts, put the account name where you're promoting it so that you can actually say that, hey, it was this account that actually influenced this behavior. The other is organic or paid. Social is probably the only channel where you have an opportunity for both. So you actually want to be able to measure the difference. Did this happen because there was so much paid advertising behind it on the social channel, or was it this organic content that influenced that behavior? The only way you could do is to stuff that into your metadata. And then the last one is a unique ID for the status update, because the last question you're going to get is which status updates influenced customer retention the most? And you're going to want to be able to measure that. And so we actually put a unique ID, we have a database of all of our status updates, and we stuff that into the data. Once you get that done and you understand what your tagging structure is going to look like, then you have to do a gap analysis. And the first thing you want to look at is actually, will the current process actually work for real-time link creation? Because a lot of times what I hear from enterprise marketing teams is, well, I got to send it over to direct response, I send them my link, and 3 days later they send me back a tagged link, right? That's not going to work for us. So we have to look at that process and say, what's the #1 shortcut to speed up that time so that I can actually create my own links? And then the next one is there a need to operationalize link tagging? Because a lot of direct response teams that we talk to, actually, they have people who sit there and do nothing all day except for create tagged links for people. It seems like we could use their talents in a much better way. So how can we actually make it easier for them while making it easier for social? Because direct response teams understand tagging infrastructure, and they know, like, whether it's a title case or lowercase, whatever that is. Social teams aren't going to understand that per se. So we want to do something maybe with drop-down menus or something so that they can't mess up the data and separate it into 2 categories. And then how much content curation do you do? This is a big one, because the way paid advertising is actually tagging their links will only work if it's a link to your website. If you're doing a lot of content curation, it's not going to be measured that way. So you want to understand the gap of how much curated content you're using. And then the last is, how many microsites or branded sites do you have that aren't on that data infrastructure platform that you've built? This happens when, like, an agency stands up a microsite, or you wanted a website for something and so you couldn't get it through IT, so you paid an agency to do it for you, and it's not within the data infrastructure. Anybody have those? Yeah, I figured. This is probably one of the biggest gaps from a measurement perspective that we have, is because they're not integrated into the data infrastructure. And so you can start to look for what is that shortcut to get that stuff either integrated, or is there a shortcut to get around it? And you're probably wondering, okay, well, what kind of impact is that going to have, right? Well, I'm going to tell you, it changes everything. It changes what you report on, how you tell your story. It changes the amount of data that you have available. Literally, if you think about what you want and all the questions you would have from reporting, or that you might get from your management team in reporting, you can put all that data in there and not only answer it for now, but for as the system grows. Literally for years to come, you'll be able to answer those questions. I put as much in there as possible, even if I think I won't use it. And so this is an example of just like a rough kind of dashboard that literally is designed to tell the story of how social media influences the customer journey. And so you can see we have the 7 categories of the customer journey there, but the metrics are really different. You'll notice there is not a single social metric on this page. We talk about CPM, right? We're comparing it. This is control group analysis. We compared people who touched social to the rest of the universe that hadn't, and we found that it was a cheaper cheaper CPM. Why do we use CPM? Because paid marketing uses it. That's really the only reason. It's not the best measure. Engagement, we roll up all of those metrics that nobody else understands, these social metrics, into a cost per engagement. We look at things like the cost per website visit for consideration if you actually have a strong web presence, the cost per acquisition, how much product adoption is happening, advocacy, we're looking at online reviews, and loyalty, we're looking at the 3-year customer value. And so we look at this over time, and we could slice this any way we want. I can do this for a campaign, I can do it for Twitter, I can do it for Facebook, or I could do it for social as a whole. I could do it for a specific type of content. I can do it for anything. And it's a totally different way to look at the data so that you can actually start telling the story. Because if we're only measuring for one goal, what'll happen is that we're looking at acquisition costs and not realizing that we're retaining at a much higher rate as well, or that they're adopting a lot more products too. So we want to measure all the way through. And to give you an example, I ran my own numbers because I can be really transparent about those numbers and tell you exactly what they are. And we're going through a website redesign right now, and I wanted to really understand how sharing on social was impacting the consideration of our consulting services. And so what we did is this social link clicker, we actually break it down into 2 groups, first party and third party, meaning it's curated content versus a link directly to our site. And then we looked at what happened. This is only a month worth of data. But the big insights that we found is that for people who click on the links we share to our website in social, that they visit more often than the average site visitor, frankly 171% more often. And that they have 259% more page views. And they spend 323% more time on site and bounce 72% less often. They're far more likely to visit multiple times with an average of a 950% lift in multiple visits. More interestingly, that they consume our content and they do it often with a 2,672% increase of visits from 51 to 200 times. So what this tells us is that our social audience that's engaging with our links, that they actually care about our content and they are loyal readers of our blog. And that from a consideration standpoint, if we're trying to get people to consider what we do, this is a valuable use of our time. And then I wanted to know, okay, we curate a lot of content. Up to 80% of our content strategy is actually curated content. So we wanted to measure the impact of that as well. And what we found is that the numbers are even higher for curated content. Now, the caveat to this data is that we're actually measuring when they return to our website. So if I send them out to Mashable, we measure when they come back. And then we watch what they do on site. And so it was a 302% more page views with 188% more often. The big one here was a 4,915% increase in visits from 51 to 200 times. So curating content is driving an even more loyal reader for our site. And that was interesting to me because as I assign resources for content creation and content curation, this is worth our time. Now, this is only one step in that customer journey, right? It's only consideration, but we're actually doing this across the entire journey, so we can also look at things like retention and actually acquiring clients. You probably want to know how we did that. Basically, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. We set up custom segments inside of Google Analytics. We also actually tracked how Google automatically tracks it, and the story was totally not interesting. So knowing the social link clicker versus how Google tracked it was very, very interesting for us. We then put it into Excel. Don't strain your eyes. It's literally death by Excel. We take all that data, we put it into Excel, and we run some formulas to understand the percent change. And with that, those are my tips for what's missing in social media measurement. Take a look at your control groups, set up your tagging standards, and hopefully you can get this kind of data too. Thank you.
Thanks so much,
You're
Nichole.
welcome.
I know we have some questions. So as we've done before, raise your hand. Ryan will get a microphone to you. Please give us your name and who you're with, and then fire away.
Here you go. You drop this. No questions? Come on.
Hi, I'm Carrie McQuaid, and I'm with Hallmark. You talk about talking to all the different parts of your company to understand the journey. How do you get those other information, all those, the stats and the data that you need from the other groups? Like, do you have any tips for working across your silos and companies? And
I actually just go directly to the reporting team and say, this is what I want, right? Like, I just say, you know, look, this is what I want, the segment of social media users that touch Twitter, and these are the specific stats I want. I want to understand, you know, awareness, engagement. I go through the whole thing, and we have a list of those, and I just get them directly because, frankly, they don't have a vested interest in providing you that data, right? So that's how we look at it. And what you saw on that dashboard is that we actually, from an acquisition point, we found that organic search was our #1 top converting source, because social actually starts the conversation typically, and a traditional marketing channel converts it. So we actually end up helping them by showing some stats that are important for them, and then also create a partnership with us because we can show that there's a symbiotic relationship there.
Hi, James from Novartis again. Thanks, great presentation.
Thank you.
So I have an interesting question. You know, because you're talking about who's in your data frameworks, and maybe all of you and you deal with really gentle, polite people who are completely collaborative. But occasionally in my career, what I've seen is, I was just reading an email, sorry, also during the presentation about Google Analytics, and everyone is scared about data transparency, right? So you say, hey, we want to get on a common system. We want to put GA in so we can put tags in and da-da-da, so we can actually see what's going on. What's fascinating is some people are like, keep your metrics off our site. We have our own way of doing it in our agency sensors report. Well, like, so they want to massage the data so they can say our site was successful, rather than actually put data on so you can all talk about whether things are really successful. So I guess my sort of question or comment is, I assume you've probably seen that, and maybe some of the ways that you have that conversation to say, you know, it might be good for us to actually get to how do we talk about this value.
Yeah. So I see this a lot. It happens a lot in large enterprise companies. Worked for a bunch of them myself, so I totally understand. The best tip I can give you is that inside of organizations, people play games, right? And they play games because they want something, or they're either trying to head towards something, or they're running away from something. And what they're running away from is actually accountability, most times when we're talking about measurement. And so basically what I do is I put everybody in a room and I say, hey guys, guess what? None of you can be successful without the other, period. None of you can be successful without the other. So we are removing all of the gameplay. I list out all of the games, hero, villain, victim, status games, all of them on the board. And we say, if you see someone playing a game, you have the permission to call out the game, and the game ends there. So it's more of a cultural thing, but it can, like, if you can get into the game of playing no games, you win. Anybody else? Shall I wrap now?
Yes.
Baby
Please,
got back?
actually. Yeah.
Thank you. Hey, Nicole. My name's Josh, and from Zappos, and I actually think I have those shoes. So one weird barrier that I've run into is we like curated content. However, we like shooting our own and kind of like sharing. What's one way to kind of push up the ladder working with some of the brands that we work with on like getting curated content from them, like selling it to them and selling it to our uppers to actually use that instead of some of our own stuff.
So you're asking how to kind of get your partners on board to give you good curated content, essentially. So one of the things that we've done is, like, we call it holy smokes content, right? Like, it could be anything. It could be photos, it can be written content, and we actually give them a framework for what holy smokes is, and we ask them to define their holy smokes factor before they give us, before they ever write a single word, before they do anything. So if I was going to take pictures of these shoes, I would want the holy smokes factor of, holy smokes, those are awesome. And so I'm going to take it at a different angle than I would if, like, holy smokes, these are really great conference shoes, you know, whatever that might be. So we give them kind of a framework, and it's a lot of education and training, quite frankly. You're welcome.
We have time for one more question. Anybody? All right.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Nicole.
The presentation you just saw was presented at socialmedia.org's Brands Only Summit in Orlando at Disney's Grand Floridian Resort from October 27th through the 29th, 2014. This thrilling event featured 16 peer-to-peer collaborative workshops, 12 how-to classes, 12 real-world case studies, 3 brilliant authors, and 2 amazing keynotes. The socialmedia.org Brands Only Summit is where you'll learn the latest in enterprise social media management, make connections with social media leaders like you, and engage in deep peer-to-peer discussions. See more videos and find out how to join us at our next event at socialmedia.org/events. Socialmedia.org is the community for social media leaders at the world's greatest brands. Members help one another by sharing best practices, actionable advice, and solutions to issues they can't talk about anywhere else, all in our vendor-free environment. If you're leading social media at a major brand, you belong in this family. Learn more at socialmedia.org.